Thanks, everyone. That's a great introduction from my old friend Blake. If you want to embarrass him, you could ask him about Nashville sometime. Just start that way. Nashville, question mark. I'm going to talk a little bit about terrorists, about French farmers, which is a different group of people, Italian politicians, U.S. presidential candidates, and it's going to be an optimistic story. You might even laugh here along the way, learn a few things. Because I'm kind of a world-traveling optimist, and the more I look at things, frankly, the better they look, even though it's pretty scary out there. Let me start by telling you a story about Gloria and Ike. Now, these are made-up names, and those of you in the audience who are paying attention might realize, well, Gloria, Ike, the names of two Florida hurricanes. Well, for our story, we've changed the names to protect the guilty. Gloria and Ike are a married couple. And, Gloria has all these projects and plans. She wants to, redecorate the living room, renovate the garage. She even has a plan to paint the floor of the garage. Now, Ike works hard all week. He's tired of rearranging the furniture and things. And it takes a lot of nagging to get him to do a small thing. One day, a hurricane lands in Central Florida, takes out the house. It's a total loss. Baby pictures in the mud. It's just gone, right down to the foundation. And he's not sure what to do. He looks at her. She's not saying anything. Now, they got insurance. Sooner or later, the adjuster's going to show up. He's not sure what to do. This looks pretty scary. And as they take a drive through the subdivision that was home, they're driving out of the area, looking through the window, rearview mirror. His wife suddenly starts to smile. Now, he's known his wife a long time. Ike's not stupid. He's not going to ask her right away why she's smiling. I mean, the house is gone. Memories, furniture, things, everything's gone. Just the two of them in his car, making their way to the interstate. But after a while, Ike's curiosity gets the better of him. And he says, Gloria, why are you smiling? Why do you seem happy about this? Yes, we're insured, but we just lost everything. And she says, well, we're covered, right? We're going to have to do some work and, a few co-payments here and there, but basically we're covered, right? And he goes, well, yeah, that's right, but it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of time and never quite be the way it was. And she said, I could never get you to redecorate one of those rooms. Now I get to redecorate the whole house. And we're in an interesting part in history right now. Our world really hasn't changed all that much since 1945. Yeah, technology's changed. We put a man on the moon. We can carry a computer in our hand that's greater than the computer that put the Apollo project on the moon. Technology's changed. Culture's changed some. But the fundamentals of the international economy haven't really changed that much. Yes, there's 1971 Bretton Woods going off the gold standard, a few details like that. But we haven't had a big event that made us rebuild the world in a long time. Now, the bad news is that big event, that hurricane, is going to land sometime in the next 6 to 18 months. The world is going broke. You look at those charts, France, it's in debt, 80% of its GDP is debt. Germany, 87%. Now, you've probably seen the charts of the United States that we're at 100% debt to GDP. Well, I got some more bad news for you. If you compare us to Europe, you think, well, those Greeks, they're at 165%. We're at 100%. Okay, we're in trouble, but not as bad as those Greeks. Yeah, but the Europeans calculate their debt differently than we do. They use something called the Maastricht criteria, where they count all levels of government debt, state, local, and federal. And if you do that in the United States, we're at 170% debt to GDP. We're more in debt than the Greeks. Now, we're a bigger economy, we're more resourceful people. That's the bad news. The storm's coming, and it's going to be tough. But here's the good news. We get to redecorate the whole house, right? We get to take a look at all these institutions and rethink them. And frankly, in the last 30, 40 years, we've had a lot of people with really unrealistic ideas. Now let's start with Europe, because it's always fun to pick on them. I was in the Pas-de-Calais a few years ago in the northwest of France. And, you know, farmers will rent rooms or outbuildings, make a little cash. So I'm staying at this French farm. And just as I'm about to get out of the car, you know, it's France, so you can bring your dog anywhere. Got my dog with me. He says, well, don't let the dog out. I said, well, why is that? He said, well, it'll terrify the chickens. I'm a chicken farmer, he says. I look around, I see into the horizon, you know, under the steel gray dome sky, you know, that constant rain, green fields. I don't see a single chicken. This guy says he's a chicken farmer. Well, okay. So I slowly put the leash on the dog and put him in the outbuilding. Walking around the farm, I don't see any chickens. And finally I say, you know, maybe I misunderstood you. My French isn't so good. You said you're a chicken farmer. He goes, that's right. Where are all the chickens? He says, let me show you. And he shows me a dozen chickens. I said, where are the other chickens? He goes, that's it. That's all the chickens. I said, you got a dozen chickens and you're a chicken farmer? He goes, well, to qualify for the French subsidy as a farmer, you need 10 chickens. But I'm practical. If one or two die, I need to keep my subsidy going. So I have 12 chickens. What do you do with 12 chickens? I said, you know. I mean, how many eggs do you get? Who do you sell the eggs to? He goes, I don't sell the eggs to anyone. It's for me breakfast. And this guy's receiving a subsidy from the French state. In fact, 20% of the people living in France are technically farmers. They don't farm much, just enough to get the subsidy. This is an incredible expense for them. Food prices in Europe are much, much higher than the United States. This is part of the reason why. But this is one of these unrealistic ideas that Europe has adopted since the end of World War II, and it's not going to last. At some point, in the next 18 months or so, they're going to have to rethink farm subsidies. They're going to have to rethink a lot of things. Europe is going to have to change or die, and that's going to be true for us too. Maybe not as severely, maybe not as quickly, but they will have to change, and we will have to change too. And this is good, because we can't keep going the way we're going. I don't know if you saw on television this morning, the Italian welfare minister. Yeah, they actually have a government official called the welfare minister. The Italian welfare minister was crying. She had to explain to Italians they couldn't retire at 52 anymore with full pension. You know, the average Italian works for 9.5 months a year and is paid for 14.5 months. Yeah, they get bonus payments when it turns December. It's the Christmas bonus. If you're on welfare in Italy, you also get the Christmas bonus. Again, these things can't continue. They've been borrowing tremendous amounts of money to support a welfare state in order to elect center-left political parties across Europe. We've been doing something very similar here, borrowing money from the Chinese to fund a lot of things that we just can't afford anymore. So the good news is we get to take a look at all those things, and we need to make changes. Because if we don't, we're not going to be able to continue. So the world's about to change, and I think it's about to get better. I think a lot of unrealistic programs are about to go away. Some of those programs are actually regulations. You farmers certainly know what that's like. Regulations written in offices by people who've never got their shoes dirty. Not quite sure how to implement them, but they're very good at writing those rules. So as the Italians and the French are bemoaning this, I think the difference in America, and I travel to Europe and North Africa and the Middle East quite a bit, one of the things I notice when I travel around America is people can't wait to get started. People have energy and ideas, including people in this room. And I think they could make a big difference. So while we're more in debt, can't possibly raise taxes any higher. I don't know about you, but I don't think anyone's going to sign up for a tax increase. You can't borrow much more money when you're at 170% debt to the size of the economy. There's a third option. You can sell things. 1 out of 3 acres in the United States is owned by the federal government. Some of that is used by farmers, timber growers, other people. And a lot of it's just held up in wilderness areas and parks. And then there's, of course, the Bureau of Land Management. It's not a park necessarily. They just hold land. Well, when you're in trouble, you sell land to people who can use it more productively. So I think we're going to start to see a lot more land sales. We're going to start to see some downsizing of government. And it almost doesn't matter who the next presidential candidate is. I'll get to candidates in a moment. I think they're all going to have to look at the same stark set of hard choices. And a lot more realism is about to come into the country. And largely, that's a good thing. But I'm not worried about the future of the country. The next 18 months are going to be hard. But I think that as we have this national conversation, there's going to be a re-examination of a lot of things. One of the things I think that's going to change is terrorism. Let me start with some good news about that. How often have you heard good news about terrorism? Al-Qaeda is essentially on its last legs. Bin Laden is dead. The number 3 guy in Al-Qaeda keeps getting either captured or killed. Al-Qaeda in August 2001, just before 9/11, was estimated at 20,000 people. Now, for people who said you can never defeat terrorism, I said to them, after 9/11, I think the United States can defeat 20,000 people. Now the best estimates for Al-Qaeda are 1,500 people, 1,500 people. Their numbers are going down. They have recruitment problems. They have money problems. And their ideology isn't as appealing as it once was. Last week I was in Morocco and watched the first multi-party democratic elections in an Arab country that we didn't invade. And I talked to the Islamists, the radical Islamists. They won the majority of the seats. You probably saw that in the newspaper. And I went to see the head of the party. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And he says, oh, you Americans, you're going to ask me if we're going to ban alcohol or bikinis at the beach or something. I said, no, what are you going to tell me what you're going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do, he says, is cut taxes. The top tax rate is going to fall to 25% in Morocco. Second thing is we already have a free trade arrangement with the United States, but we're going to try to get one with Europe and with the rest of the world. We've got to increase economic growth, or we're not going to get reelected. Sounded like pretty sensible. Now, of course, they like to tell visiting Americans what they want to hear. But I looked at the party platform, and it has all of these sort of economic growth things in it, and none of the crazy Islamist stuff you usually see. When I was in Tunisia a month before that, I went to see there's a 3-member committee that runs the country, the Transitional National Government. And the number 2 guy has a degree from Romania in, get ready for it, privatization studies. And I said, well, what are you guys planning to do? So when we write the Constitution, we're going to sell off a lot of these government assets. We're going to pay down the debt. We're going to have free trade with the world. And we need to create jobs and growth and hope, or we're not going to get reelected. It's interesting. And sometime before that, I'm talking to the Afghans, some of the senior advisors to Hamid Karzai. I said, well, what are your plans in the following year? He goes, well, when the U.S. pulls out, the State Department is going to leave. The American regulations will leave with it. And we will do what Iraq did. We're going to have unilateral free trade with the world because we need to create jobs. We need to create hope, or we're not going to get reelected. You're beginning to see a theme here, maybe. And now that theme is dawning on the Europeans and the Australians. And the Canadians already have it. They've cut taxes. They're opening up trade. Essentially, they've realized that the only way to pay for all these things is to make major changes. And the next president, when he's sworn in January 2013, is going to be in the same boat. He's going to realize that if we do not create jobs, if we do not solve the housing crisis, if we do not give people real reasons to hope, they're not going to get reelected. The whole world is having the same conversation. The whole world is looking at, and I hear this again and again, at all these same sets of problems and saying, okay, we can't keep going the way we've been going. We've got to do something else. We've got to return to the things that we know work. Now, why does that matter to farmers? Well, Most Arab countries now are announcing that they want freer trade. Now, if you've been to that part of the world, you probably noticed two things about it. One is that it's very dry, and the other is only parts where things grow take a lot of fertilizer, a lot of high-tech seed, and a lot of consulting. They bring in experts from Europe and the United States, teach them how to grow in dry climates. And so, even if they were to double their farm capacity in most of these Arab states, their population is growing at a much faster rate. They're going to need food. And the barriers to trade that were there are going to go away. Hungry people need affordable food. You hear this over and over again across the Arab world. Even the radical Islamists say it. They know it's a crisis, and so they know they need America's farmers. So I think the size of the export market is going to grow. Now you're probably thinking, well, what about the euro? The euro is certainly in trouble. The dollar isn't much better off, by the way. When you talk to Wall Street folks, what they say is the dollar is being artificially supported because money is looking for a safe place to go. If you can't invest in the euro, the yen and the pound are essentially one country currencies, so that you can't diversify your risk. It's not a global reserve currency like the dollar or a multi-country currency like the euro. If the euro collapses, the dollar will go with it. But if the euro collapses, Europe will collapse. I'm betting that Europe's not going to collapse. I'm betting that this is going to be this moment of realization where they realize that they've got to make fundamental changes if they're going to survive. Now let's look at the EU budget for a moment. 80% of the EU budget is spent on two things. One, which is called the Common Agricultural Policy. This is a complex set of programs that basically amounts to farm subsidies and farm regulations. And then there's the Common Fisheries Policy. That's the other one, where they decide to tell people who commercially fish how to do it and what price they can sell at and that sort of thing. That's 80% of the European Union's budget, not the national budget, but the supranational budget of the EU. And that, in that Common Agricultural Policy, as you know, there are many restrictions on what food they can import. They're overproducing in many categories. They're not facing the discipline of the market. But in Brussels, the bureaucrats are chewing on the end of their pencils and staring at the ceiling. They can't afford to keep this going. The day of reckoning is here. What does the world look like if the European Union, the euro, survives and the Common Agricultural Policy goes away? So I think for farming, the future is very bright indeed. I think for the country, our country, the United States, the future is very bright indeed. I think that we will be faster, more realistic, more aggressive in making the changes that we need to make. Yes, we've got some challenges out there. We've got some economic challenges, we've got some cultural challenges, and we're still fighting a war against terrorists. But we're making progress on all fronts. And so you can look at the headlines and you can be depressed, or you can look at the world and say, we're now at an inflection point. We're now at a point of enormous change, and whatever decisions are made next are going to have to be a lot more realistic. I mean, the way to look at it is the United States is a lot like a guy who's been told he needs to have a triple bypass. But that's not it. That's not it alone. He's also been told that once he gets the bypass, he's got to change his life. And that's where we are. The good news is we're going to change, and we're going to make it. Now, getting into some other possible changes, let's look at the war on terror. Anybody who's traveled through an airport knows it's an extremely annoying process. For me, I never understood why they searched the little old ladies with the walkers, right? How is this woman who can barely make it down the aisle going to take over the airplane? Do you ever wonder that? Or the 3-month-old baby? Why do they search him? What are the chances the 3-month-old baby who can barely roll over is going to take over the aircraft? And the reason is they have quotas. They have internal regulations that say you must search, according to a distribution of age, gender, and ethnicity. So you got to search so many white guys, you got to search so many babies, you got to search so many old ladies, because the process has to be fair. We're searching a lot of people that don't need to be searched. We're not just hurting the airline business, we're hurting our security. Because there's something called surveillance fatigue in the business. If you're working at TSA and you're looking at scans or having people show you their tickets, you're looking at 500 or 600 people an hour. Well, divide that by 60. How much time do you have to look at each one? Not very much. It's an unrealistic idea. When you begin to look at the system a different way, I was talking to Mary Winchester, who's head of security at Heathrow in London. It's the 4th busiest airport in the world. She says they train their people differently. One of the things they do is they put up a one-way window, looks like a mirror from the other side, in the airport. And they make these guys sit and just watch travelers walk through and say, which one looks suspicious? Well, the first 2 days, the new recruits sit there, bored stiff. They just see traveler after traveler after traveler. But the 3rd day, they start to see patterns. And on the 4th day, they say, why is that woman carrying a bag that weighs more than she does? Why does that college student have very expensive luggage? They start to notice discrepancies in the patterns. They become a lot smarter at searching people, right? And we also know that terrorists are constantly testing the system. When Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was debriefed or interrogated, if you wish, at a CIA black site, one of the things he revealed is that they would sometimes duct tape 9-volt batteries to the bottoms of their feet or different parts of their body just to see if they'd be found in the search process. They're constantly looking for holes in our safety procedures. But what they can't change, what they can't ever account for, is exactly the kind of thing that Mary Winchester at Heathrow was talking about. Things that don't fit. And there's a different way to search. One of it is based on the FBI's database. The FBI has a database of about 266,000 names. These are people who've either received a phone call from a known terrorist or made a phone call to a known terrorist. Now, you can look through your phone book on your cell phone. Chances are you don't have bin Laden's phone number in there. And chances are he hasn't called you, right? Or anybody else in the al-Qaeda organization. Chances are you've never shared a bank account with a known terrorist or an apartment lease. But this is using computers and this database. This is a much more effective way to search. Now, are we going to do it because suddenly the TSA woke up one day and said, you know, we're really wasting a lot of people's time. It would really be more efficient to do it this way. No, that won't be why we do it. We'll do it because we still need to be safe in the air and we're running out of money. Impending bankruptcy of the United States brings a lot of common sense to the fore. Does it really make sense to put people out of business based on dust regulations? Does it really make sense to shut down an oil or natural gas pipeline that could employ thousands of people? Does it really make sense? All of these things, when the government does them, they cost the private sector money, but that also costs the government money. And we're about to have, in 2013, the first realistic Congress in more than 60 years that's going to have to look at everything and say, does this really make sense? So, from my own point of view, I think a lot of what the government does doesn't make any sense at all. So I think a lot of what they're going to conclude is we just simply can't afford to keep going the way we're going. Now, you can be pessimistic, and you can say, the house that we grew up in is gone, or is going away. Or you can be optimistic and say, well, when common sense is applied, we're going to end up with a much better house overall. A stronger one, better able to withstand the vicissitudes of international affairs, economic downturns, but also one that's just far more reasonable, far more sensible, far more sustainable. So we're going to pay off this debt. We're going to become economically independent. And I really think that 5 years from now, we're going to be looking back at this dark time and say, just like the guy with the triple bypass, why did I ever eat 3 cheeseburgers for dinner? Why did we ever borrow money from the Chinese to pay people to sit around? Why did we ever regulate business far beyond the need of any kind of environmental protection or safety, just to make bureaucrats happy. Why do we do all these expensive things? We're going to look back on it because we'll be as an odd part of our history, because we'll be living in a new world. So I think it's time now that when you see this future coming, this future of tremendous change, I think now it's time to prepare for it. And a lot of the ordinary Americans are preparing for it, probably some of you in this room. If you look, the Federal Reserve keeps a number called consumer credit outstanding. It's the total amount of unsecured debt in the United States. They started measuring this in 1947. And every year, the amount of debt held by the average person has gone up until 2009. 2009, for the first year in American history, consumer debt started going down. And it went down in 2010. And for the figures we have for 2011, it's gone down again. People are getting out of debt. I'm not talking about revolving lines of credit or business-related stuff. I'm talking about consumer debt. In 2012, 2013, the government is going to have to begin to get out of debt. And as it does, you're going to see changes in the country. So if you can prepare for those changes, look at what the world is going to most likely be, you can prepare for yourself. For the farming business, I think as world demand continues to rise, not just with population, but with freer trade agreements with the hungrier parts of the world, starting in North Africa and the Middle East, but perhaps extending elsewhere into Asia and other places, I think you see that there are tremendous markets for America's crops and America's know-how. Begin to prepare yourself for this new world we're going to be living in, and start to think about how you'd like to redecorate the house, the new house, because the old one is going away. Thank you very much.